Hey, welcome back to another For Community inductive study for community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others. And I really hope you're going to connect with God too. So you see that on the left side, I've got Evernote open. Right side, I've got the Olive Tree app open with the New Living Translation. Mark chapter 1, starting at verse 35. And I have no idea what's coming at me. I mean, I've studied through the Gospel of Mark before, and I've kind of got a good idea of what's in it, but this is fresh. So let's go into the text beginning at verse 35. And I'm going to guess that we're going to stop at 39 this time, because that's how the text breaks it up. So let's read. Before daybreak, the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." But Jesus replied, "We must go on to other towns as well, and I will preach to them too. That is why I came." That is so not pastoral. That is so on mission. You know, as a pastor, you know, the expectation tends to be that if somebody comes at you and says so many people are looking for you, you got to get to it and you got to serve those people. But this is not what Jesus is doing here. So he traveled throughout the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Moments of isolation, not extended isolation, moments of isolation to pray. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna pass this through the inductive filter, observation, interpretation, application, and after the jump, I'll let you know what I came up with. So as you can see in the Evernote app, you see that I've got what I filled in for the question. So what did I hear? Let's start there. The things that jumped out at the text to me while I was reading it, when I read it. Jesus got up early to pray alone. It kind of jumped out at me. I think the reason it did is because so many people want to say that Jesus spent a lot of time in isolation. Jesus spent a lot of time praying. I don't see it in the text. I see that Jesus intentionally prays. I see that Jesus intentionally seeks solitude for a certain amount of limited time, and then he jumps back into getting on mission. So this idea that Jesus retreated and spent a great amount of solitude all by himself, and therefore we need to retreat and spend a great amount of solitude time all by ourselves. It's not in the text. I don't see it anyways. So Jesus got up early to pray alone. I see that. Intentional solitude prayer time for a limited space of time. I see that. Now, the disciples found him and told him people were looking for him. That's pretty typical, right? Tyranny of the urgent. If you don't got a plan, if you don't have an idea of how you want to spend your day, how you want to spend your life, everybody who is coming at you all the time, they're your boss, and you're a slave to whatever they think is urgent to you. Jesus is on mission though, so he's not a slave to that. Jesus replied that he needed to go to other towns to preach, so focused on mission. I mean, you think that Jesus came to serve, Jesus came to seek and save the lost, but here he is. He's got a large crowd coming up to and following him and wanting to see him. So you'd almost think that, of course, Jesus is getting what he wants. He's getting that large crowd. He wants to be with the crowd, and totally not. Jesus has a different idea about the crowd. He's like, nope, got to keep on preaching. There's more people that need to hear the gospel. We're going to talk about the crowd a little bit. He came to preach. I noticed that Jesus did come to preach. He came to communicate the gospel. It's going to bring us back to the 4-part thesis of the Gospel of Mark. So he's acting as an agent, as a communicator of the gospel. And then he traveled through the region to preach, and he also cast out demons. It's almost like a side note that it's not the big thing that Jesus was doing, but as a result of the big thing that Jesus was doing, demons were also cast out. So the big thing that Jesus was doing was seeking out crowds, and as he was seeking out crowds, there's this kingdom clashing, the two systems that are at work in the world, the system of God and the system of the world. Kingdom clash happens, and demons are coming out during that kingdom clash. So that's what That's what jumped out to me. That's what I observed in the text. So let's just break it down, and I'm going to share with you what I feel it means. And I really hope that you found something different in the text, so that you and I could have a conversation about this, and try to see how we either connect with the meeting of the minds, or how we differ, and how we can grow together with the different ideas that we get from the text. So what does it mean? First, I notice that Jesus' public ministry isn't all that there is to him. And I think it's very important to understand this, that maybe we have a concept of Jesus, that he came to the world and he had a public face and wanted to go to the masses and just gather a following, and have people listen to him. There's more to that, more than that, to Jesus. He takes alone time with God. Understand that to be a time of personally connecting with God, and a time of refueling from the life the crowds have sucked away. And so as I was dissecting the text and thinking through this a little bit, when people spend time with crowds, and they're on point and they're working, and in this case, Jesus is communicating the gospel. He's preaching. He's communicating, this is how to come into the kingdom of God. That takes a lot of energy, a lot of spiritual energy, emotional energy, mental energy, even physical energy. It's draining. And if you're always spending time with the crowd, you have to spend time outside of the crowd to refuel, to remember who you are, to reconnect with God. So vitally important. That's what Jesus does here. He refuels by connecting with his Father. Second, Jesus continues to cycle back to the hear part of the pattern. People need to hear, and then they need to receive, and then they need to follow, and then they need to step into agency. That four-part thesis of the Gospel of Mark, what we hear in the Gospel of Mark all the time. So he continues to cycle back to that hearing part. He's communicating the gospel so that people can hear it. He's not been tempted to stick with the crowd, and I think that's very important. Rather, he continues to find other crowds in order to communicate the gospel. So in the church, I find that people in the church are fighting for the pastor's attention, and fighting for any kind of leader's attention. And what they misunderstand is that the leader of the church, the pastor of the church, whatever you want to call that person is seeking other crowds to communicate the gospel to. That, yeah, they love you and they're concerned about you, and they want to pastor you and mentor you and disciple you, but there's also more on their plate. They're also on mission. They're on mission to go to crowds, to seek new people, and to draw them to Christ. And I find that there's a conflict in the church just over this, like who owns the pastor. Is what I see in the church a lot. That members think that the pastor belongs to them. You know, we're tithing, which pays for your salary. You're treating a tithe like a tax or something. And so therefore, pastor, your attention belongs to us. When I phone, you have to call me back. You can't just talk to me once every 3 weeks. When I phone you, I shouldn't have to make an appointment. It should be right away. This is particularly in small churches where they think that they have 100% access to pastor all the time. Well, you know what? The pastor's on a mission too. And that pastor, like Jesus, going to crowds to seek people who need to hear the gospel and test receptivity, so that they then can also come to know Jesus as well. So Jesus, he's not sucked into the temptation of sticking with the same crowd and sort of getting that ego boost that, people like me, people love me, people want me. Doesn't do that. He stays on mission. Jesus' focus seems to be breadth over depth. You know, he wants the wide game more than he wants the deep game. And I think that just jumped out to me because for pastors in particular, for church leaders in particular, who have the gift of evangelism, a desire for evangelism, who want to see people who are far away from God come closer to God, you know, they take some heat. And organizations like churches that excel in, or just want to focus on outreach, they take some heat, because other churches would say, well, what about discipleship? What about depth? Well, hello. Jesus actually went for wideness over depth. I mean, was there depth there? Yes, there was. But it looks to me, Jesus' pattern throughout the gospel looks to me that depth cannot be accomplished without width. If people are not widening their influence over people who need Jesus in order to give them opportunity to respond to Jesus and come into the kingdom, which leads to further opportunities for disciples discipling disciples, for mentoring to happen, then if you're only focusing on depth, it's going to be very, very shallow, because depth without mission isn't depth. Depth without mission, that's actually pretty shallow, and you're off mission. You're just not getting it. You're not getting what Jesus is about. So Jesus is actually going for wideness, going for let's talk to as many people as I can, communicate the gospel over depth. He's not, now he does have his small group of people. He's building a group of 12 disciples, and there's depth there. There's that inner core there, but that's his lead team. And he's saying, okay, you come alongside me. This is his discipleship model. This is his depth model. You come alongside me and work with me as we attempt to widen what we're doing. We're not going to stick together and only do the depth thing. We need to widen what we're doing. So if you're a church that is just, we need discipleship, those churches that focus on outreach, they're wrong. Okay, you're missing something here. You can't be deep without being wide. Going deep without being wide, that's just self-serving, and it's treating the pastor in a way that's something other than what Jesus really has in mind here. What I see in the text here is Jesus is more interested in exposing the masses to the message than he is at taking them deeper. That seems right to me, and maybe it's just right for this context, because this is the very first time anyone has ever heard the gospel. And that really, for the world, we're meeting a lot of people who it's the very first time that they've ever heard the gospel. So same thing I think should apply to us. Go for width instead of depth here. By the time he reaches the cross, a large enough portion of the population will be familiar enough with the message that they'll understand some of the context behind the cross. Here's what else I think in terms of interpretation. The disciples are still there helping Jesus. They're not taking an active role. They're still in the background. Let's not forget about them and what they're doing. They still haven't figured it out yet, though. They see the crowd, and they're confused by it. They see the crowd as success. But Jesus doesn't see the crowd as success. He doesn't see it as the goal. He sees it as the mission field. That's part of his mission, to go to different crowds, to share the gospel, test for receptivity, and look for people who want to be followers of Jesus and cycle back to sharing the gospel. Yet the disciples see, oh yay, we've gathered a crowd. This is success. Let's camp out right here. And that's not what Jesus is about at all. For Jesus, at this point in his public ministry, success is a wide audience, although shallow. But that's success for Jesus, because he's on mission for the 4-part thesis of Mark. Got to go and communicate, got to invite people to say yes to Jesus, mentor them in order to, this is what it means to be a follower. And as you're mentoring them, you are an agent doing this stuff, and then you release them into agency. Part of depth is acting as an agent. You can't escape that. Depth doesn't come from an extended time spent together. It comes from receiving Jesus and then following Jesus. It comes from engaging in gospel communication leadership. I am most impressed by Jesus' understanding of the crowd here, because it's not a typical understanding of the crowd. Jesus wants to communicate the gospel to the largest number of people he possibly can. So yes, it is about the numbers, but not about the numbers of the large crowd that wants to follow him, even superficially. It's about the numbers of people that he and his lead team get to communicate the gospel to. He is committed to the mission. He's committed to communicating the gospel and training his lead team to do the same. If you want depth in discipleship, this is how you get it. You're an agent, and as an agent, you're going to tell people this is who Jesus is, and then offer them an opportunity to say yes to Jesus, and then mentor them. This is what it means to pray. This is what it means to read the Bible. This is what communion and baptism is. This is what it means to worship. This is what tithing is. And also, this is what it means to share the gospel. This is what agency is. Come alongside me as I'm being an agent. and then am mentoring you, and then I'm going to release you to be an agent, so you're also going to mentor somebody else that you bring to Jesus. That's the depth. That's the depth of Christianity here. So we see Jesus committed to communicating the gospel and training his lead team to do the same. Looking for the pattern here, hear, receive, follow, and still agency. At this point, the largest part of the pattern being demonstrated here, I think, is the hearing part, which is demonstrated through Jesus preaching. I think so. So Jesus as the agent demonstrates the need to seeking crowds, going to people, finding people to communicate the gospel to. And then on the flip side of that, we see that people need to hear the gospel. Jesus is on mission to make sure that people are hearing the gospel and they're able to have a moment to receive. Still very early in Jesus' ministry here, so we're not going to see a lot of people receiving Jesus and saying, yes, I want to be a follower. So he's still getting the word out. So he's not as interested in really just sticking with one crowd. He wants to get out there and get the word out. Looking for the second pattern, that would be the leadership pattern. That's call, observe, and to be announced. So how does Jesus build his lead team? How does Jesus mentor those who have said yes to him? What does discipleship look like for Jesus? Okay, so this is the lead team here. The disciples are in observation mode and not yet communicating. So Jesus is mentoring them. Walk alongside me, watch what I'm doing. What they are observing is Jesus' commitment to mission of communicating the gospel to the crowds in order to make the opportunity of receiving him accessible to a great number of people. They're not observing followership. They're experiencing followership by being part of Jesus' lead team. They're not observing only, but they're also experiencing. Are they in the observation mode? Yes, they're in observation mode. Yet they are followers, partaking in followership and experiencing alongside Jesus as Jesus their mentor and the one that's discipling them, experiencing what agency really looks like. Observation is so very important to get into Jesus' headspace. Unfortunately, it takes much longer to get into someone's headspace than it takes to get used to someone's activity. So the disciples are mistaking Jesus' activity for his intent and are still not understanding the mission. Here's what I meant by that. The disciples are getting confused here, I think. They're observing Jesus, and they think, hey, Jesus is trying to draw a crowd, and they mistake his activity for his intent. They're not deep enough yet. It's taking them a while to get in his headspace. So Jesus correcting them, no, let's go to other crowds. You haven't got me right here. We need to keep on going to other crowds. Listen, this is Jesus' discipleship model. A lot of churches' discipleship models happen inside the building. Okay, now that you are a Jesus follower, let's stay inside the building. Let's do some Bible studies together. Let's learn how to pray. Let's pray together. Let's fast together. Let's get you baptized. Let's get you tithing. It's all inside the building model. And that's not Jesus' model. That's not the initial, the truer model, the sort of right at the very ground zero approach to discipleship. That's not his model. Jesus' model of discipleship is get out of the building, let's get an agency. Jesus' model of discipling is mentoring. As an agent, as a kingdom agent, I'm going to mentor somebody else. As I see this person walking alongside me, we're going to be engaging the lost together. Even though you have no idea what that means, you're going to watch me as I do it. And then you're going to try to get in my head. I'm going to be teaching you, instructing you. But discipleship means it's on the ground. Discipleship does not mean we're not ready for evangelism. Discipleship does not mean we retreat inside a building for an extended period of time. Not at all. Discipleship means that we're learning what it means to be a follower of Jesus, with the mindset of humility, saying, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm accepting Jesus. I'm letting him lead me. So Jesus is leading us somewhere, and that's to the people who don't know him. That's to the crowds. So discipleship happens within the space of people who don't know Jesus. Discipleship happens from a person who's engaged with people who don't know Jesus, and he's leading them to Jesus. That's Jesus' model of discipleship here. That's what Jesus is doing. That's how he's developing his lead team here. So whatever you're doing to disciple somebody else, or whatever you're doing to be discipled, make sure that it has an element of being with people who don't know Jesus. If you're just stuck inside the building, then it's not going to work. That's pretty shallow. It's a shallow form of discipleship, in my opinion, because it's missing mission. It's missing agency. Agency is part of discipleship, because where are the disciples going? Well, we would say we disciple people into Christian maturity. What does Christian maturity look like? Well, it means we know how to sit in a pew and listen to a sermon and clap on 2 and 4. No. We know how to give money to the church. No. A mature believer makes believers. That's maturity. Wise people save souls. Wise people, somebody who is wise saves souls, and somebody who wants to be wise saves souls. So you can go back either way on this one. Part of agency is to be out in the field and to win the lost. Part of being a mature Christian means engaging with the lost. And somehow, there's no obligation to copy somebody else's style, but if you want to grow deep in Christianity, it doesn't get deeper than diving into the belly of hell itself and pulling somebody from out of there and helping them get on their feet and helping them be a hell diver as well. So that now you're jumping to hell with another person and pulling more people out of that. That it doesn't get any deeper than that. So if you're looking for a discipleship model, look at Jesus' model. What does he do? He mentors people while he's engaging with the lost. He doesn't retreat into the building of a church, nothing. He's on the field. He's with people who need Jesus. He's seeking crowds, and he says, "Come alongside me. I'm going to teach you what the Bible is. I'm going to teach you how to pray. I'm going to teach you how to fast. I'm going to teach you how to tithe. I'm going to teach you all this stuff," while we're also engaged in agency, and we're communicating the gospel, and we're giving people opportunity to come to Jesus. All right, let's look at this now. What do I have to do? The application part of it. So this is just what I feel is relevant to me. I feel that I need to volunteer for Jesus Gospel Communication Lead Team. I hope I can volunteer it. If to volunteer for it, it feels like I was called. I put this in there because in the church, even in seminary and Bible college, it feels like there's this tension within Christianity that one needs to be called in order to step into bigger sort of vocal kind of ministry, platform kind of ministry, public kind of ministry. Well, you can't do that unless you're called. Are you sure Jesus called you? Okay, well, yeah, Jesus has called everybody, but we also have to volunteer for it at the same time. And we can volunteer for it, knowing that Jesus has first called us. So for my part, I need to continually volunteer, because I get lax, right? I get lazy, right? Like, am I called? Well, I think we're all called. Am I volunteering for it? Well, yes, I have at many moments in my life saying I'm volunteering for this. I'm stepping up. I'm moving forward. I'm taking a shot. I'm taking the lead on this one. I'm going for it. But yeah, we get tired eventually, and we kind of drift. There's some mission drift sometimes, where there's different priorities that kind of sneak up on our life and hit us from the side and take us off track. And it feels like I constantly need to renew this putting my hand up, saying, "Here I am, send me." Let's look at Isaiah. How was Isaiah called? Was Isaiah called? No. Why do you say no? Because God says, "Who shall I send?" And Isaiah says, "I volunteer." That's what I'm talking about here, okay? Like that call is for everybody. Who will go? Who will I send? Who will I send? Be an Isaiah. Say, "Here am I, send me." And look at how God used Isaiah. He was a volunteer. It didn't start with specific name calling in that passage. It started with Isaiah saying, "Here am I, send me." And that's what I'm telling you, that we need to volunteer for this. And God honors that, and he'll use it. So the call goes both ways. He calls us, we volunteer for it. I need to get out of this rut that I'm in, and I constantly get in a rut, right? Like, I'm a dad with 4 kids. I'm 47. I'm getting tired. I've got my routine. I'm a graduate student. I'm a church planter, and I do this kind of stuff on YouTube. And I get into a rut, okay, just because life has a routine. I need to stick in my schedule. I need to make sure that I'm not always stuck in this rut, although having a healthy schedule is healthy. But I need to make sure that I'm not getting stuck in this rut. And I need to get out of it by finding a crowd to communicate the gospel to. If you feel like you're stuck in a Christian rut, this is how you get out of it. You look for the people around you, a new person, perhaps, that you've never really tried to share your faith with, that you've never really tried to say something, anything about Jesus. Go to that person and start building a friendship with them. Start looking for a moment that you can inject a little, do you want to come to my church? Do you want to come to For Community? Can I talk to you about Jesus? Whatever it looks like for you, just go for it and wing it, really, if you don't know it, until you figure out your own style, what's best for you. Okay, then I need to not confuse the crowd with success. So For Community, thankfully, we have some small amount of momentum, and our influence is growing in a very small amount right now, and people seem to be interested in joining the community in a small way, which is fine. But as that gets bigger and bigger, I need to make sure that doesn't derail me. Like my goal here, for me personally, is I really want the maximum amount of people as possible to come together to connect with other people, and also, God willing, to connect with God as well. And I need to stay on that mission and not get derailed by saying, okay, there's a big enough group of people here. I now no longer have to be interested in other people connecting with others and hopefully with God. I'll just let the people that are already here to connect with each other, and mission done. I need to make sure I never get to that space. Jesus never did. While I'm doing that, I need to identify my lead team of gospel communicators, so basically people that I'm personally mentoring, who will step up to the call and who will commit to being an observer while leading a gospel communication initiative. So whoever it is I'm going to be mentoring, I'm mentoring them in the context of what I'm doing as a leader. I'm mentoring them in the context of they're walking alongside me as I reach out to other people, because that's what discipleship has to look like. It has to look like mentoring, an agent mentoring another agent. That's what it needs to look like. Jesus may not have been confused by the crowd because of the time he spent with the Father alone. This kind of jumped out the page for me again. He's not a monk here. He's not spending ages and ages and ages inside isolation without people. Like this pandemic, oh my goodness, I'll be so glad when it's over. I hate all this alone time. I really want to be mixing up with other people, like in real time, real space. Like I love the online thing, I really do, but I miss just connecting with my neighbors just on my deck or something. I don't have a deck on that front landing in front of my door of my house or something, right? I hate it. Like my neighbor and I love connecting, but we're right beside each other and we're connecting on Zoom. Like I want him to come over so we can start playing cards or board games or throw darts together, just go out for a burger. Got a bunch of neighbors that I just like going out for burgers with, and I can't do that. So Jesus spent a small amount of time, focused time, connecting with God, connecting with his Father. You and I need to be doing that as well, because we get so depleted by life. Our resource, the way that we fill up, is by connecting with God, starting the day with God, every day starting the day with God at some level, at some quietness, quickness. It's fine. Just make sure we get it in there. Reconnecting with God likely centered him back on relationship and back on mission, which likely diverted him away from crowd pleasing and worldly kingdom growth. And so what I'm talking about centering, when we don't center back on Jesus, we forget what our focus is, we forget what our mission is, and then it's tyranny of the urgent. Whatever urgent thing comes around, that's what we're going to be doing. But centering back on God will focus us back onto agency, our kingdom activity. Worldly kingdom growth is so observable that it's a distraction from mission. God's kingdom is only observable when people who have engaged followership demonstrate it with gospel communication and gospel and kingdom activity. Remember, the only way to see God's kingdom right here and right now is by somebody communicating it and demonstrating it. Without the communication of the kingdom and the demonstration of the kingdom, nobody knows about the kingdom, because it's a spiritual kingdom right now. We need gospel communicators and gospel demonstrators as well. It has to be both. You can't just demonstrate the kingdom of God because it just looks like a nice person. It just makes you look like a Canadian. You got to be communicating the gospel as well as being that nice Canadian person, or wherever you happen to be from. Where there is no gospel communication and demonstration, and where there is ineffective God connection alone time, the crowd and other observable things, they result in mission drift and even mission reject. We've got to be very careful not to confuse the crowd for mission. The gathering that we have as pastors on Sunday mornings, that is not the mission. And it's not discipleship if we're not getting them out of the building and engaging with the lost. If they're not leaving the building to engage with the lost, and pastor, that is not discipleship. Jesus' form of discipleship included being an agent, mentoring someone into agency, because Christian maturity is agency. And if our people in our churches aren't growing to the point where they step out in agency at some level, then Christian maturity hasn't been arrived at. Like, we've got to be at some level sharing our faith. In the first century, second century of the church, it wasn't actually the apostles, the 12 apostles, that were doing the whole spread of the gospel thing. We read in the book of Acts about Paul's missionary journeys, but you know what? Paul was journeying to churches for a big part that were already established. Did he plant a church? Well, yeah, he planted a church. But he was going to locations that had already heard the gospel. Before he got to Rome, the gospel was already in Rome. What was going on? It was normal, everyday, average Christians that were sharing the gospel in their travels. It was at the time, slavery was such a huge thing back then. We don't count slavery in terms of people. We count it in terms of percentages. As the slaves were traveling, they were sharing the gospel. As merchants were traveling, they were sharing the gospel. As people were going from town to town just to visit family, they were sharing the gospel. As people were being pushed out of regions because of persecution, they were sharing the gospel to the new places they were going to. It was just the everyday average Christians who were sharing the gospel. Everybody was walking with agency. It wasn't the apostles being the primary communicators, although they were communicating the gospel. It was the everyday Christians. For some reason, in this North American context, we have lost agency, and we need to get it back. We can't go deep with Jesus without agency. We're really limiting ourselves, and we're really not getting the full heart of God. If our discipleship programs, if our discipleship models don't include an agent mentoring someone else to step up into agency, then our discipleship programs are lacking. Our discipleship programs, our mentoring thing, they need to be on-the-job training. I'm an agent looking to share with people who Jesus is. Come alongside me as I do this. Yes, we're going to be studying the Bible together, praying together, fasting together, all that kind of stuff, worshiping together, and all that. But we're also going to be learning how to talk about Jesus. We're going to be demonstrators and communicators of the present kingdom of God. Because if we're not communicators and demonstrators of the present kingdom of God, nobody knows the kingdom of God is here. It's on our shoulders. So let's go to the summary. Jesus' public ministry is a demonstration of the first point, and that would be here. And on the flip side, for agents, that would be communicate the gospel. He continually cycles back to gospel communication to the crowds, and he doesn't allow the crowds to take him off that mission. We don't really see a lot of that second part yet, which is to receive, like that moment where people say, yes, that aha moment, yes, I do believe in what Jesus is saying. I do believe in Jesus. And then switching to number 3, I'm now going to be a follower. Still too early in the text here. So we're seeing a lot of here. We're seeing a lot of communicating of the gospel as an agent. Jesus' public ministry is also a demonstration of the second, I said pattern there, second pattern, which is the development of his gospel communication lead team. So pattern number 1 is that 4-part thesis, which has 2 sides, right? For the part for somebody just coming to know Jesus, and the part for somebody who does know Jesus, that's mentoring more agents, right? So it's as people who don't know Jesus, there needs to be a moment where we hear and then receive Jesus, become a follower, and then also step in agency. Then those of us who know Jesus, we are agents that are communicating the gospel, inviting people to receive Jesus, then mentoring those people, and then releasing them into agencies. That's the flip side, the 2-sided coin of the 4-part thesis of Mark. But then the second pattern that we're seeing develop here is Jesus' lead team. What he does as a mentor, what he does in that flip side, what does his agency look like? This mentoring thing, it's not sitting in a circle singing Kumbaya. This mentoring thing is on the job training. At the moment, they're demonstrating followership by their commitment to the lifestyle of a follower and by working as a helper and observer of the gospel communication. This is going on. The text is revitalizing something inside of me that is encouraging me to seek out a lead team and a crowd for gospel communication. Like I've got a team of people around me that I'm their fans. I adore them. They're awesome. They make my life better, and I want to make their lives better as well. And I really want to continue. It's just something inside me just really compels me to say, I really want to invest more of my life into them so we together can work on what it means to be an agent. Just one more thing in the summary here that I really want to talk about. The text is leading me to wrestle with the question, am I still called? Was I ever called? And I want to wrestle with that question because I want us to understand that calling, volunteering, it's both the same thing, that God calls us all, and we also need to volunteer for this. So I say, I really hope I can volunteer for this, and I know that I can, and I really hope you want to volunteer for Kingdom Agency. Now, I'm reminded of another example in the gospel where someone was preaching the gospel who was not a part of Jesus' lead team, and Jesus encouraged his disciples to let him do his thing. Like anybody who speaks well of me can't in the next turn speak ill of me. So it seems to me that even if I can't confirm a calling, I can still volunteer for this. And again, we have the example of Isaiah. Although with Jeremiah, God says to Jeremiah, I knew you while you were still in the womb. With Isaiah, God starts it by saying, who will go? Who can I send? And Isaiah's like, here am I, send me. So it's a two-part thing, right? God calls and we also volunteer. Where do you want to start that process from? Do you want to start that process by discerning if God has called you, or do you want to start that process by deciding to volunteer for this? Both are a legitimate way of jumping into Kingdom Agency and going to share the gospel, just connecting with people organically, just befriending people, trying to get in their lives. And then while you're getting in their lives, invite them to join your life as well as you begin to mentor them closer to Jesus. And then I'm ending with one question to me. Oh man, who do I want to be on mission with? And maybe that's a question for you too. Who am I most compatible with? Who are you most compatible with as we go on mission together? So here's my prayer here. God, please help me to find a crowd to communicate the gospel to. Please help me to find a team of people who will join me on mission and commit to communicating the gospel to the crowds. Jesus, please help me not to confuse the crowd with success. Jesus, please help me discern who I want to be on mission with. Where do I fit in, God? Who am I to do gospel communication and gospel lead team development with? Who am I to walk alongside on mission? I hope you pray something like that. Well, you pray totally different, whatever. I hope that you and I don't see the text the exact same way, because then what do we have to talk about, right? Let's see the text a little bit differently, and let's discuss it. Listen, if you're not a part of a community, can I just invite you to be a part of this community for community? What are we doing at For Community? We're creating community spaces. Do you have to be a Christian? No, not at all. We have people in our community space that aren't Christians. It's not forced on you, but just know my intent. My intent is for you to know who God is and for you to be able to connect with God personally through Jesus, for you to understand who Jesus is. So yeah, totally join us. It's an open mic sort of concept. Everybody gets a voice. Everybody gets a chance to communicate. It's awesome. Right now we're only meeting on Zoom, which is good for you on YouTube, because this is for you too, regardless of what country you're in, what tribe you belong to. You are invited. For Community, creating community spaces so that you can connect with others. And during this time of pandemic, we're all kind of on lockdown and we've got to socially distance ourselves. Yeah, we need this. So For Community, creating community spaces that you can connect with others, and I'm really hoping you're going to connect with God too. All right, see you next time.